All right, and we are live and recording.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. I want to welcome everybody that's come to the webinar today. I would request that you would put your name and whether you're a homeowner or a renter in the chat, and whether a business or organization. And then also, I'm kind of assuming that you're from Green Bay or De Pere area, but if you aren't, please put that location in there as well. And as we go through the presentations, if you would put your questions in the chat, that would be great. Or else you could unmute yourself too. So we have started today our webinar. And first off, I want to welcome everyone. And I want to remember that today is Veterans Day. So I want to thank all those who have served in the military. Very important thing. And also, for those of you who have just joined us, please put your name and whether you're a homeowner or a renter in the chat, and also where you're from if you're not from the Green Bay or De Pere area. So today we will start with Caitlin for an introduction because she is our technological person. And without her, I would never be able to do any of this. So Caitlin, you take it away.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin Haynes. I am the coordinator for Joshua. I started out as a volunteer with Joshua as an AmeriCorps member back in... Oh, I hear some feedback. Right now, I help chair 2 task forces for Joshua, and one of them is the Environmental Justice Task Force. So if you like what we are doing today, you can visit our website, joshuaforjustice.org, and join our mailing list and learn a little bit more about everything we work on. As Sue said, I will be doing my best to be the technical assistant. This is my first time helping host a webinar. I would just like to thank everybody for coming, and I will pass it back to Sue.
Thank you, Caitlin. Yes, my name is Sue Van de Heij. I'm a retired preschool teacher, but I am passionate about the environment. So when I joined Joshua about 3 years ago, we talked about working the environmental task force, or actually bringing it back from the dead. So we've been doing a few things this year, and one of them we decided to do was this webinar. The reason for the webinar is because when I was watching the salt awareness webinar of 2025, it really made me aware of all that can be right with salting and wrong with salting. And so when I go outside and look at different places, I was not impressed with some of the techniques that were being used. And I thought, oh my goodness, people really need to be educated on this. And so when this time came up and Caitlin and I talked about it, and I had met different people that I knew that could help me, especially our panel that's with us today, I thought, hey, let's do it. The more people we can get educated, the more we can protect our water. The other thing I didn't tell you is that I am a grandma. And so I have 2 granddaughters. And so I really look to the future and want them to have a good future environmentally speaking. So one of the things I did, and that's kind of how I started on this too, is I planted native plants. And it's so cool to see all the pollinators and different birds that just come to my yard just because of that. So I'm a firm believer in protecting all that we can for our environment. So with that said, I'll explain today what we're going to be doing. We have basically 4 on our panel. Alyssa Ranke will be telling us more about home and business, residential, proper salting techniques, and then Nathan Wonkendonk and Josh Brassfield and Tony Feetzer will be telling us what the municipalities in Green Bay and De Pere are doing. So with that, and then in the end, we'll have time for questions, and we'll take your questions out of the chat unless you'd rather unmute and ask the question yourself. So with that, we will begin with Alyssa. Alyssa Ranke is the Urban Stormwater and NEWSC Coordinator at Fox-Wolf Watershed Alliance, where she supports communities across the region to fulfill their stormwater permit requirements. In addition, she works with the general public and K through 12 educators, teaching about stormwater and how everyone can help keep our waters clean. Alyssa has been in her current role for over 3 years. However, she interned with Fox-Wolf Watershed Alliance during college for 4 summers, coordinating the organization's Clean Boats, Clean Waters program. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Geography and Environmental Policy and Values from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. Outside of work, Alyssa enjoys gardening, canning, and exploring local parks. Now I see that we're only 5 minutes into the webinar, so I'm going to repeat again that if you're just joining us, please put your name and whether you're a homeowner or a renter, and then the area where you're from, if you're not from Green Bay or De Pere, so we kind of have an idea of where everybody is coming in from. So sorry about that interruption, Alyssa, but I will give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I can't miss out on the train. So again, I'm Alyssa Renke. I'm a homeowner in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, but I'm working here up in Appleton. That's where our office is located. Just hoping everybody can see my screen. It looks like I'm presenting. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So again, I'm Alyssa Renke from Fox-Wolf Watershed Alliance. I'm the Urban Stormwater / Noose Coordinator here. NUSC is more of the municipal side of it, but urban stormwater is, basically everybody else, right? And today we're going to talk about simple habits, especially shoveling early and often, and how that can keep us safe and protect our local waters. Salt safety and environmental health go hand in hand. So just a little background. So Fox-Wolf Watershed Alliance is a nonprofit that works to protect, restore, and sustain the water resources of Wisconsin's Fox-Wolf River Basin. We do this in a holistic way by having folks working in stormwater, aquatic invasive species, agriculture, shoreline restoration, and more. And we believe you can't achieve water quality goals without working on all the aspects and with diverse audiences like the general public. So we work with communities, businesses, residents to keep our water clean and reduce salt pollution is one of the key winner initiatives that we focus on. So before we kind of get into it, I said stormwater a bunch, right? But I like to make sure everybody knows what stormwater is. So stormwater is rain, snow melt, ice melt, and the water that we put on the land. And as it moves across our landscapes, it picks up pollutants, whether we can see them or not. So there's some pollutants we can see, like garbage, right? People always talk about garbage and picking up, which is fantastic. But there's pollutions we don't see, right? Like salt. And when the water moves across landscapes and it picks up those pollutants, it's eventually going to get into our waterways, and that can be from a variety of different ways. For example, our storm drains. Most of our storm drains go right to our lakes and our rivers. This means the pollution is going right with them, right? And on a large scale, this matters because we all live in a basin. And you probably live in the Fox-Wolf Watershed Basin, right? Basin or watershed is interchangeable. And on the screen, you can see a map of our basin. And it's hard to tell the scale, but the top of our basin is actually Crandon, Wisconsin. The bottom is the Fond du Lac area. It goes all the way over to Portage. And then on that east side, you can see that it goes all the way up Lake Winnebago along that Niagara escarpment. And a basin or a watershed, I like to think of it, I always say it's a bowl of cereal. Everybody's had like a bowl of cereal, or they've had oatmeal or soup or something, right? So when I make my cereal, I put my cereal in, I pour my milk in, and as I'm eating that cereal, eventually the liquid in the bowl is going down, and it's going down to one spot, the lowest spot, the bottom of the bowl. And that's basically what a watershed is. So what this means is that all the water and the pollutants in it eventually are going to drain to one spot in our basin. And if you look at the map, you can see the boundary, right? You can see the boundary of our basin, and you'll notice that the Green Bay is the end. So that's actually the end of our watershed and where all of the algae, the runoff, and all the pollutants are ending up eventually from our watershed. So what that means is the algae, the runoff, the sediment, and the pollutants that you see in the water in Green Bay and leading up to Green Bay aren't just from Green Bay, but they're from all over our watershed. So that's why it takes a approach from all of our communities, all of our residents, to really focus on water quality. And then just a couple of facts, the Fox-Wolf River Basin drains more than 6,300 square miles to the Bay of Green Bay. That's a lot of land. And it's the largest drainage basin to Lake Michigan and the third largest to Great Lakes. So we have a huge impact on the water quality of these Great Lakes, and our Great Lakes are also an international resource, right? So all the pollution we put in matters. But what is road salt and why do we use it? So the most common de-icer is sodium chloride, rock salt. So you hear me say chloride, sodium chloride, salt, we're kind of talking about the same thing, is that rock salt that we put down on the ground. And what it does is it lowers water's freezing point so that ice melts faster and the roads stay less slippery. The salt prevents, crashes and falls, and that's the good part. So that's why we did it, so that we could make the roads safer. But going kind of into the science of it, right? And just like a hair into the science of it, I won't get too crazy with it. But water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. But the colder it gets, the more difficult it gets for salt to work effectively. So I have this graph on the screen, and to put it simply, right? So we can see that when salt performance gets worse, when temperatures go below 25, and it virtually becomes ineffective below 15 degrees. And you can see that spike right back up to the top where the salt's no longer effective in helping melt that freezing point. I say less effective because it will do something. It's just going to take days for salt to do its job. And it's not practical, right? Like salt sitting on ice isn't going to help the road conditions for days on end. We need to get that up. Also, when I'm talking about temperatures today, I'm typically talking about pavement temperatures. And I don't expect folks to go out and scan their pavement and see how cold it is. Sometimes you can Google it, but also just know, like, as we get more and more into winter, the ground is going to freeze. So those temperatures are going to become a little bit more representative of kind of what the air temperature is, right? Additional chemicals can be added to salt so that it's capable of lowering the freezing point of water more than road salt does. And we've seen this, some studies from like Marquette University and other places on road salt, and they show that you can pre-wet salt, like a lot of our Department of Transportations do, or municipalities do, and that improve the salt's performance at lower temperatures. But for personal use on the residential side of it, most people couldn't afford the cost of like liquid applicator systems, and they also have like a lot of maintenance. So if we're talking on the small scale, the residential scale, shoveling early and often is the key to reducing that salt and helping with that ice from being formed. But the summary of it, right, is why did we start using it? Well, it's because salt's cheap and it's available, and it helps aid in winter maintenance to make roads safer to drive. And salt started to be used in the 1940s for this practice. And then I'll keep sprinkling in little facts as I'm going. So the U.S. uses more than 20 million tons of road salt every year. That's a lot of salt. So what happens to the salt? So when salt does its job and it's melted water, the storm water, it goes into our storm drains, our creeks, our rivers, our groundwater, and it doesn't just stay on the road or in the soil. Unlike other pollutants, salts or chlorides don't break down and evaporate. I'm a fan of like analogies and things that we all do. So I'm guessing everybody has boiled water at home, maybe for pasta. And if you add salt into that water, you're not going to be able to get that salt out. And that's the same thing with the road salt that we're putting down. I think there's a really important graphic on here that we use often in our work here, is that it only takes 1 teaspoon of salt to permanently pollute 5 gallons of water. And that salt in the water has high impacts in a bunch of different ways, right? So our storm drains, again, go right to our rivers. There's not a cleaning process that happens. The water's not going to wastewater treatment plants. And even if the water did go to wastewater treatment plants, they would not be removing salt because it's such a costly and difficult process. My old coworker, Kelly, love to make like memes and infographics. So I always got to include some of them in here. So on the left, you can see when you find out that excess salt runs off of our roads and sidewalks, goes into our storm drains, and ends up in our lakes and our rivers. I think that's the face as you learn more about salt. When you see excess salt, you're like, oh, not good, right? And the thing that I also like to say is we have fresh water here. We don't have salt water here. And that's why it's also a really big component to our salting practices, because we're changing the salinity, the saltiness of our water. So the impacts on our waters. Within the Fox-Wolf watershed, most storm drains lead directly to local streams and lakes, no treatment in between. And during winter thaws, salt runoff surges into our waterways. So in spring, chloride levels spike again as the snow melts. And over decades, those small spikes add up to permanent salinization, saltiness of our water. And what are some of these effects, right? So chlorides can be toxic to many freshwater species like fish, frogs, tiny aquatic insects, and this has an impact on the food chain or the food web in our communities. You know, studies have shown chloride levels rising 84% in northern U.S. streams, and this is because not only from the salt we're putting out in winter, but also like water softener usage. You know, this is a little bit more technical and I can talk about it later, but like once levels exceed 230 milligrams per liter, many aquatic species start to suffer or die. And we can have these exceeded concentrations during winter, especially in our urbanized areas where we have a lot of pavement, because there's a lot of salt going down. Salt runoff also increases the corrosion and damages to infrastructures and vehicles. Some of the environmental impacts that we touched on, right, is salt doesn't just change chemistry, it's changing our ecosystem. So it's going to harm those insects that fish depend on for food. Amphibians are really susceptible to pollutants. So it's going to impact frogs and salamanders and that are highly sensitive to salt. It's going to impact our aquatic plants that can't tolerate some of that water chemistry shifts. And that can also have impacts on algae blooms. Salt spray can damage trees and lawns and the plants. And soil salinity, so the saltiness of our soil, can also make it harder for your plants to absorb water. For infrastructure, it's going to corrode bridges, metals, pavement, rebar, and vehicles. We can see that, right? We've seen rusty vehicles all over. That's why a lot of the southern states don't have kind of the rust issues that we do, because they're not applying the road salt to it. And the costs, right? We talk about how salt is so cheap, but the cost of the damages done is in the billions of dollars annually for corrosive repairs. So this also, right, going a little bit back to some more of the environmental stuff, is it seeps into our groundwater and increases drinking water salinity in some areas. And this can have an impact on folks with health issues, especially like salt sensitivities. And there's research that shows some wells, sodium levels are rising, and that's a health concern for people with like hypertension. And that's because that goes back to the idea that more salt doesn't always mean more safety. So safety versus oversalting. We need traction control and we need safety, but more salt doesn't always mean more safety. Most of us use more salt than we need. What we do often see is like heavy piles of rock salt or driveways layered in that like white residue. And that's not exactly safe. It's not increasing the safety. More salt doesn't mean more melting. It can only do its job so well. And then it becomes wasted salt and pollution. So over application is going to waste money and harm the environment. And again, salt doesn't work below 15 degrees Fahrenheit pavement temperature. Excess granules after salting, that's also just wasted salt. We can reuse that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So when it's colder than 15 degrees Fahrenheit, adding more salt doesn't really do anything. Instead, you want to use sand or other traction control measures. And knowing when salt actually works is going to help prevent that unnecessary application of salt. And then on the screen, you're going to see I have a 12-ounce cup. I also have one in person. I'll hold it up, right? It's small. It's 12 ounces, right? Like a normal coffee cup, unless you're me and mine's massive. But this 12-ounce mug or cup, when you put salt in it, that's enough salt to treat a 20-foot driveway or 10 sidewalk squares. That puts into perspective how much salt we're actually using. Another little thing is like, it's like 3 inches between each salt granule is more than enough. Like you don't want them closer than that. So we're applying a lot of salt. And then the better strategy is to shovel early and often, right? So why does this work? Because early removal means less ice and that means less salt. So snow is easier to remove when it's fresh and it's fluffy. If it's left there, it's going to get compacted and that's when it's going to form ice. And then when the ice forms is when people are starting to put that salt down to help break it down. But if we're removing it, right, that means fewer icy patches form and less de-icer, salt, whatever you're using is needed. So shoveling or plowing is going to quickly prevent that bond from actually happening between your snow and your pavement. So when we remove snow early, it's going to interrupt that melt freeze cycle that creates hard ice. And we see lots of different businesses, schools, universities, municipalities that have this kind of same policy of that we don't use salt as an alternative to timely salt removal. And then just for a quick visualization, so if driveway A waits until the evening, snow is compacted, which is going to form more ice, and then they're maybe going to dump like 5 pounds of salt down. But if driveway B shovels mid-storm, like if we have a big storm, and often, that's going to make the pavement stay clear, and they could make, if they need to use salt, they might only need to use half a cup of salt, which is a significant reduction in the salt we're using. So if you multiply this across hundreds of homes, that's hundreds of pounds of salt saved per year, per neighborhood, per storm, right? So what are some of those smart salting tips? So we want to shovel right after it snows and during those longer storms. I know I get up early to do that shoveling, and that is hard sometimes, especially when it's cold out, but it's well worth it because if I drive over the snow trying to go to work, that's just a bigger mess I'm going to have to deal with later. Shovel first, lay salt down last and only when we need it. We want to break up any ice with a shovel or like the snow picks and stuff before adding any salt. And we want to use a spreader or a shaker for even coverage. I know some municipalities have these cups in their offices and other places have these cups in their offices that you can get. We only want to use a small handful of salt per square yard, like we talked about. It's like such a small amount of salt we actually really need to use. And when we do use salt, we only want to use we only want to use it on thin ice. And we can sweep up that excess salt. Like if we put too much down, it's done its job, there's salt left over, we can sweep it up, put it back in our salt bucket and reuse it. A couple other little housekeeping things is like making sure we're storing our salt in covered areas. Mine's in my garage because when I get my snowplower or my shovel out, I got my salt in there if I need it. We just don't want it to be out in the open where snow's going to get in there or it's going to leak or something like that. And then we can consider sand or other alternatives for traction control in those really cold days. What we don't want to do is salt before we shovel or before a storm. And we don't want to use salt below 15 degrees pavement temperature. It just won't work. And if you see like, again, those crystals left behind after melting, you've used too much. That's a sign that you've used too much. So with those, some of these alternatives, we've got sand and you see municipalities using sand, right? I've talked to some folks and they say, I like to use cat litter because I got it on hand. I would just say, don't use clay-based cat litter. Otherwise, that's going to be really, really messy in your house, in your car, wherever. I've talked to folks who like to use bird seed, especially like the black sunflower seeds. When the sun shines down on it, it heats the seed up and it's going to melt into that ice. It has the added bonus of feeding some of the wildlife and coffee grounds. I think most of us survive on coffee and we have coffee grounds laying out at home. And that's another thing that we can utilize as an alternative for traction control. Just to touch briefly on some of these local success stories, and I won't touch too much on Green Bay and De Pere because they'll talk. But we want to mention what municipalities and local partners do because everybody's doing their part, right? So there's several Fox-Wolf communities that are already like leading the way. We have folks like City of Appleton and Outagamie County who have adopted brine systems. And brine is basically salt and water, and it's reducing the salt they use. I could go on all day about brine, so I'll dial it in for a second. We also have local Department of Public Works that are tracking their salt usage through Salt Smart Wisconsin goals. And then we have businesses and parking lots that have switched to brines to cut their salt usage down nearly in half. the Fox-Wolf is expanding their practices and workshops and partnerships with folks to spread this message on kind of all those audience levels. And just on the screen, you can see some pictures of our latest winter equipment open house in Saltwise training, where we had more than 70 attendees from local municipalities, school districts, private contractors, come and learn about salt practices, brining, new equipment, and more, really learning from each other, all to help reduce their salt usage and be more effective in their winter maintenance practices. So the benefits add up, right? So salts runoff from driveways and parking lots, and that's going to end in our streams and rivers, Lake Winnebago, and eventually Lake Michigan, right? And high chlorides levels are affecting drinking sources and all those other impacts we talked about. But when we're reducing our salt, we're not only saving money on salt and repairs, but we're keeping our, yards and trees and plants and pavement healthier. And we can keep sidewalks and driveways safer with less environmental and other costly effects over time. And each household small changes adds up across our region. And just here's a picture from one of our volunteers who was doing some chloride monitoring for us, but every grain of salt you don't use helps to protect all of those things. So if you like recreating, if you like fishing, if you like hanging out at the parks, you're having a direct impact on your community by reducing that salt usage. So kind of the three main takeaways is salt is useful, but it's overused. Shoveling early prevents ice and reduces salt needs. And then every scoop of salt saved protects our lakes, rivers, and drinking water, right? And then a longer list of reminders of what you can do, right, is, again, shovel early and often to reduce that chance of ice forming. Use less salt. Only use salt when the pavement temperatures are above 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Use alternatives like sand, coffee grounds, etc. for traction control. And then again, imagine if we all reduced our household salt usage. If everybody used like one bag fewer of salt this winter, that's hundreds of pounds of chlorides being kept out of our waterways. Slow down. I understand that smart salting and winter practices aren't always super quick, especially when it's very cold. Take your time and be patient with road conditions. Your municipalities are doing their best to balance safety and road conditions, right? Changing our expectations on what safe roads are and how quickly we can get places in winter is a big part of reducing our salt usage and our impact on our waters. Roads take time to be cleared. Leaving early for inclement roads and conditions. Make sure you can take your time to drive is important. I always say this one: wait to go to the grocery store until the roads clear up is important. I know a snowstorm's coming. I gotta go get bread and milk. I worked at a grocery store for years, and I always saw this. But we just gotta be patient, and everything will be fine. Municipalities are, like I said, balancing those conditions, safety, and proper winter practices. Additionally, you can share this message. So you can share what you learned today with your friends and neighbors so that they can also do their part. Follow Fox-Wolf on our socials to stay involved and learn more tips and tricks for keeping our water clean year round. So stormwater is, I always say, it's everything all the time. So winter, we're really focusing on salt, but everything from leaves and grass clippings and agriculture runoff. Like, we're talking about those things and what you can do, your business can do, and what municipalities are doing too. And get involved. So on the screen, you'll see some pictures. So one of the things that I do with my position is I do a salt watch chloride monitoring volunteer opportunities where we have volunteers monitoring our local creeks and rivers and streams from fall to spring. They only have to do 4 samples. But what they're doing is they're seeing how salty our water can get with the salt application. And you do see the significant spike over time. Going back just for a second, on this chart, you see a conversion chart, and it might be a little hard to see, but that 230 milligrams per liter is 4.8 on the scale. And on this card, you can see that we're almost at 9. So we've hit that toxic level that's going to impact those amphibians quite a bit. This isn't representative of all of them, but you can see that this specific sample was from Menasha in 2021, and we've decreased our salt so much since then, but we still do have those impacts. And I just want to emphasize that Fox-Wolf Watershed Alliance works with municipalities on smart salting trainings and watershed protection, but it also starts with you on the residential level if we're all working together. we can have a larger impact on our water quality. With that, I just want to say thank you for joining me and us today. I know we got some municipalities talking afterwards, but I also want to say thank you for being a part of the solution. When you head out this winter, remember your shovel is your most powerful tool for clean water, right? By choosing to shovel early and often and using those smart salting practices, you're protecting the Fox-Wolf watershed for like generations to come. And then I always got to have like a little bit of a shameless plug in here of, again, check out our socials and our website because we got a lot of really cool things going on. If you're not on your phone, you can scan that QR code. I know it'll be in the chat later. But also, I am a resource for stormwater, whether that's K through 12 education, general public, community events, stuff like that, the municipal level. So if you have questions about stormwater or need to be connected with somebody else, please reach out to me and I'm happy to help. That's my whole job is stormwater because it's year round. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. That was great. A lot of valuable information. Appreciate it very much. Next, we will go to the municipalities and I will do the introductions for our speakers. Today we have Nathan Wongtendong, who graduated from Fox Valley Technical College in 2002 with a degree in diesel mechanics and worked for a large construction company as a road technician traveling the United States. In 2013, Nathan started with the City of Green Bay as fleet manager and joined the Fleet Services Committee on the Wisconsin chapter American Public Works Association. Since then, he has been active with APWA, serving on various committees, involved with planning the Western Snow and Ice Conference, assists with presenting the Winter Road Maintenance Program, has been elected the Wisconsin chapter president for 2023-2024, and recently has been nominated and accepted on the APWA Winter Road Maintenance Committee. Next, we have Josh Brassfield. He grew up in Southwest Minnesota and attended Northeast Wisconsin Technical College, graduating in 2003 with an Associate of Landscape Horticulture. While working in the landscape field, he gained valuable construction, grading, excavating, and snow and ice removal experience. During that time, he earned certifications in hardscape installation and ornamental maintenance through the Planet organization, working on projects for the Green Bay Packers, legendary Wisconsin Badger basketball coach Dick Bennett, and Lawrence University, which have been some of his favorites. In 2013, Josh began working for the City of Green Bay in the Department of Public Works. He currently is serving his 8th year as street superintendent. His jurisdiction with Green Bay includes servicing right-of-way covering almost 46 square miles and 458 miles of roadway. His main goal is to serve residents of Green Bay through communication and action, while also being a good steward of taxpayer money. Josh has been married for 20 years and shares 2 daughters with his wife, Krista. As a family, they love to be outdoors, spending time with their pets, fostering for the Humane Society, volunteering at church, and traveling on summer family vacations. He cherishes family time and believes in supporting the local community. And we also have Tony Fiedler, who is the street superintendent for the city of Pere. Tony has been in public works for nearly 20 years, with the past 16 plus overseeing winter maintenance operations. Tony has presented on snow and ice related topics at various conferences and seminars across the country. Tony is also the vice chair of the National American Public Works Association Emergency Management Committee. In his spare time, he enjoys the outdoors, spending time at his cottage with his wife, kids, and grandkids. So we welcome those presenters today. And with that, I'll give you the floor. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. As Sue said, I'm Josh Brassfield, Street Superintendent in Green Bay. So Nathan and Tony, I've worked with them the entire time I've been in public works, and a lot of the things that we do, some of the things Alyssa mentioned, but we do a lot of the same things in municipal work, different communities. So I guess the main two goals of our part of this presentation would be, we're trying to use the least amount of salt for the environment and our waterways that we can in a municipal setting. But we also have to balance that with keeping our communities safe. And the other main goal would just be public education. So webinars like this, we cherish the opportunity to get to speak to folks and explain to them why we do what we do when we do it. So our first slide here, why do we need the materials? So we have to provide a level of service, right? So we're balancing that societal, economic, environmental concerns to do sustainable snow fighting. So each of the communities, and Tony could probably talk about his, but we all have a snow and ice plan, right? So this is something that's written, approved by our Common Council in Green Bay. And, what we're trying to do is follow that plan, but again, balance all of this out, because I would like to say that we would have unlimited resources, but that's not always the case. So we're trying to balance things out. So when you're looking at this slide, I mean, the sustainability, as Alyssa said, the winter maintenance practices have a direct impact on the environment, and we understand that. So when we look at the different level of maintenances on the right, there's different roadways call for different salting. So there's primary streets, there's secondary streets in Green Bay, there's alleyways, our sidewalks, depending on where they're at, get salted. So there's different levels of maintenance for each one of those different groups that we try to balance out. And it is in everybody's best interest there in the bottom that we work to reduce the environmental impacts. Anything to add, Tony?
Yeah, when we talk about level of service, each community, it's based upon best management practices and as well what our elected officials and our residents want to pay to provide. So if our citizens are content with having just tire tracks through our mains, that's what they would vote for, and that's what we'd have. Or if we have bare payment policy, so we have to try and work that in as to what's the expectation of our residents and visitors and the taxpayers of our community, as well as what are the best management practices of how we attain that level of service while still following the environmental and economical aspects that are into it. So it's not just what we want, it's what our community wants. And our level of services, each community sets their own. So for our community, we will treat our mains when we do get slippery conditions or we start to get a snow that is starting to stick to pavement, so that we can stay on the mains, which is basically handling nearly 80% of our traffic volume. And the way that we have our city set up is our mains, any residential street, if you travel 3 blocks from any residential street, you should hit a main road that has been treated. So we really try to minimize how far they have to go. But we don't plow residential streets until we've attained at least 3 inches of snow. And other communities are different, but we believe 3 inches is a safe number, both for the environmental and economical side of things, because it is expensive to operate equipment potentially on overtime or the fuel costs and the equipment that goes with it, as well as any salt costs.
Yeah, and I guess I could add to that. I mean, when we do talk about those snow plans, so Green Bay has a 2-inch residential minimum. So we're a little bit sooner, but as Tony said, that the financial impacts are, tremendous when we look at that. And I think as of recently, our winters have been a little bit lighter, but it can be very costly to continue to plow. On average in Green Bay, we're plowing our residential streets about 10 times a year. So I guess on this slide, what we're really trying to get across here is anti-icing and de-icing are a little bit different things, but we're trying to do the same thing. So anti-icing would be treating stuff before the storm. So when you see the brine that's put down days before, and we're trying to get that to bond to the road and to dry on there before the storm. And then anti-icing is treating ice, or I'm sorry, de-icing would be treating ice once it's down there. So we're trying to actually get it off the roadway. But what we're trying to do is break the bond. So you can imagine, we probably should have included this in a slide, but you can imagine if you have a pancake or an egg or something in a frying pan and you spray that pan with PAM ahead of time, right? A non-stick coating. That's what we're trying to do. So that pancake or egg would slide right out of that pan. We're trying to get the salt brine or the salt on the road to keep that, to create a bond between the actual precipitation so it doesn't bond to the road. And then the mechanical use of a plow is the best way to get snow and ice off the road. So if it's not bonded to it, we can get it off faster, therefore reducing the amount of salt that we need to treat it with, which obviously is the whole point.
What I would add to that too is oftentimes I hear misconceptions about anti-icing or salt brine and having that treated ahead of a storm. One of the things that I've noticed since we've started to apply brine, 10 to 15 years ago, is that previously, oftentimes coming to a stoplight before the anti-icing process, our tires or our anti-lock brakes would kick in. You'd feel that, that jerking motion as we come to that stoplight. And since the anti-icing has taken place and we're preventing that snow and ice from bonding to the pavement, we probably, I would guesstimate that very few of us have felt the the anti-lock brakes lock in on our main streets in the last number of years from that. We're just preventing that snow from bonding the pavement again to do the mechanical removal, which is far more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, so Alyssa had that phase diagram up, but basically, salt lowers the freezing point of water, right? And eventually that's going to dilute out. So that depends on, there's a lot of different factors. She had also mentioned a little bit that salt's good only to 15 degrees. We as municipalities have some other options with our liquids that we can apply to lower that freezing point even more. Here in Green Bay, we occasionally use calcium chloride. So you can see that in that middle, calcium and magnesium chloride, it lowers it even farther to negative 10 for calcium. We don't use it a lot because it's expensive and it's obviously very corrosive. Anytime that we would use calcium chloride, we do it as a liquid and we blend it with salt brine. So typically our mix here in Green Bay is 90% and 10% calcium chloride. But these are extreme temperatures, right? So we still have that level of service that we need to provide. And when the temperature won't allow us to salt, then we have some alternatives. But again, this would only be for main arterials, main arteries that are going to the hospitals or the Mason Streets, the universities, the mains in Green Bay, just to keep the level of service where it needs to be. And sometimes that's not even possible. If we go into a super deep freeze, we've done everything we can before the storm. And then at that point, we need to start looking at attraction sand or different methods. We have mechanical methods that are on some of our plows that can actually cut some of the ice. But sometimes in Wisconsin, with the deep freeze that happens, there isn't a whole lot we can do about it.
And also when you,
go ahead.
With the temperatures, and they see that 15 degrees, and that's the pavement temperature. And most of our equipment have different sensors where we can see both air temperature, and air temperature is typically taken at 6 feet above the ground. And then we have pavement temperature, and that 15-degree pavement temperature is what we're looking at. Those numbers can be different. A sunny day in February when the sun's starting to rise and it's 25 degrees outside, but the pavement could be 40 degrees. It's really how that pavement absorbs that temperature. And that oftentimes can be colder. It can go both ways. So we're not just looking at, the air temperature, that's one factor, but we're really focusing on what the pavement temperature is when we are looking at what we should apply.
Yeah. So, not necessarily on this slide, but I had a couple of notes here that, like Tony said, air temp versus pavement temp. We're always looking at pavement temp before we're going to apply salt. Anytime there's a storm coming, we're looking at what's the moisture content of the precipitation? Is it a wet, heavy snow? Is it a dry, blowing snow? We look at time of year. Is it a spring storm where our pavement temps might be warmer and we can afford to let that sit for a little bit and it's going to melt off? Is it mid-January where it's freezing and we need to get it off the road as soon as we can? The time of precipitation. So is it rush hour traffic in the morning or is it in the middle of the night? The amount that's going to come also plays into it. Is it a 3-inch storm that we can plow off in 8 hours, or is it 25 inches that happened in I think it was April of 17 or 18 that was a long duration storm and we ended up plowing it 4 times. Also, wind speed plays into it, wind chill plays into it, again, because that affects how the pavement acts. And then the available resources, right? How many man hours can we throw at it from a budgetary standpoint? How much equipment do we have? All of that plays into how we go into salting or fighting a storm. Go ahead, Nathan. Nathan's the IT guy here. So when we look at chemicals and blends, so on the top here, this is something I have in my office, and it's related to salt brine. On the left is 100% water. On the right is 100% rock salt. Salt in solution is at 23.3, and that's the brine. And then the 50 water, 50 salt. So it's a little bit hard to see, but basically I filled that jar up just at that with those 50%, and you can see the salt that is not absorbed into the water because it won't take up anymore. So that's our salt brine. The bottom picture is just an example of an outdoor salt brine facility. In Green Bay here, we have the capacity for 30,000 gallons. It's all indoor and contained in tanks like that. And it's all automated, right? We haven't got into the technology end of it yet, but our trucks come in, tanker trucks like that. They basically punch in codes. The salt is mixed at that 23.3 and it goes into the storage tank and then it'll get pumped right into the trucks. So the chemicals are applied to prevent or break the bond between ice and snow to the road surface. We remove snow and ice with the plow, not by adding chemicals or salt. So again, the best method for us is to remove it mechanically, right? We never have a ½ inch of snow and we say, hey, we're going to go out and salt this away. We're always putting our plows down. We're always trying to use salt as a tool, but the best way is mechanically to get it off the roads. So some of the, we talked a little bit about some of the stigmas of brine. And it is a big factor out there. From a municipal standpoint, we try to brine before any kind of winter event. Within reason. So we understand that as the season goes on, there's going to be some residual that's left on the roadways. And we try to balance that. So we're not just brining to brine. But ultimately, once we have brine and we get a storm, a lot of that gets diluted out, right? So we try to break the bond by doing the brine ahead of time, and then we'll salt if needed during the event, again, depending on what type of precipitation. But once that's diluted out, then we're to the point where the next event may need more brine on the road to prevent that bond again. I will say too, when you look at that top jar of 100% rock salt, eventually, if we didn't use brine at all and we only put rock salt on the road, that'd be 100% salt. Eventually, when that dilutes out, it turns into brine. So using brine, it's essentially 77% water that we're using, which is way less, which is a cost savings, which is also environmental savings in the long run. So liquid pre-treating, there was a little bit earlier on that. So everything here in Green Bay, and I'm pretty sure in Pere, all of our salt, as it comes down into the spreader out of the truck, it gets sprayed with salt brine. So what that does is it minimizes the scatter. So when it comes off of the spinner, we're trying to get that to sit right on the road where we intended it versus dry salt, which can bounce and scatter. Keeps 20 to 30% more material on the road. It jumpstarts that process. So it activates the salt right away as it comes down. And it also reduces the environmental impacts there. This is brine routes and plow routes. So on the left, we have Green Bay's primary brine route. So we're broken into 4 quadrants. Each color is a different quadrant. And those are the routes that we use anytime we're going to brine. So the technology end, which again is coming in this slideshow, we We have all this on tablets for our drivers. And when we get into driver training, that also helps because some of these roads, we have 114 center lane miles that actually breaks down into 340 lane miles, right? Because some of our roads are 4-lane roads. We have turn lanes. Pere has their plow routes on the right. That would be the same thing. I would imagine your lane miles are higher than center lane miles on that. But the technology end of it really helps our drivers, and it helps with our training. The days of old, when I started with Public Works, I was handed a book of maps, paper maps, and eventually you would learn those maps. And by running garbage and sanitation routes, that also helped. But now it's all digitized. So if you have a new driver that doesn't have any experience, at least he can see himself real time driving down the road. Anything to add on that, Tony? I think we can go to the next one. So we have a couple of videos. So this would be on the back of one of our brine trucks. These trucks have the ability to spray 3 lanes of roadway at a time. There's a right, a center, and a left. So when we get into the 2 or the 4-lane roads and we need to spray a turn lane, we could do that all at once. Notice as this truck slows down, the application rate slowed down. So that's the calibration end of this, is that it will only spray as fast as the driver is going. Once the truck stops, the brine stops. I think we have, this video is an example of, we have an ice cutting blade that's on the bottom of this grader. So as this comes by, you can kind of see that that's kind of looks like a honeycomb at the bottom of that blade. And then when it comes by, you're going to see there's ice cutting teeth that are on the bottom of it. This is just one way to reduce the salt usage, because if we can do it mechanically, again, that's going to be the best way. Now it might take, this is in a residential street where we're allowed to have some snowpack, but if we can hit this once in the morning, we let the sun beat on it, we come back and hit it again in the afternoon, pretty soon we're almost back to bare pavement. Salt application rates. So this is a lot of information, but basically what it's saying is that more salt won't always speed up the process. So we have on the top, there's a, it's a 12-foot, I'm sorry, I need to adjust my screen here. So it's pre-retted salt, 12-foot lane, and that's on a 2-hour route. You can see at the top the different temperatures and the different rates. The bottom is a 3-hour route, so it's probably a little bit longer route, and you can see that the rates are adjusted a little bit. All of these rates are taken into account. You know, we mentioned before all of the different traits of a storm and how we're looking at stuff to apply salt. That all factors into this. So when we look at the controls in a couple of slides down, the driver has the ability to adjust it as they're going, but we also have calibration rates that are set. In Green Bay, we have maximums that are set. So even if we have a driver that isn't trained or makes an error, they can't go over a certain rate, just because we know from the science behind it that you're not going to do, you know, you're not melting more ice, you're just wasting salt.
All right, now we're going to talk about the fun part, and that'd be spreader calibration. Reason why you want to calibrate your spreaders is you want to make sure that the spreader is set at that's the amount of product coming out. It's no different than you're at home, you're cooking or baking, and all you have is a 1-cup measuring device, and you want to look at a couple tablespoons or half a cup. You just kind of fill it up and judge it, and you put it in, which is probably the reason why my food doesn't taste the greatest, because I just really don't measure it. So kind of related to that to salt spreading is you want to make sure that you put enough product down and make sure the product that's coming out is correct. So if you got your spreader set at 200 pounds lane mile, there's 200 pounds lane mile coming out, and no more and no less. If you're not properly calibrated, you don't know what's coming out, you can't properly treat the roads. So the goal of calibrating, again, is to set the how much material is coming out versus what computer says. We calibrate both granular and liquid annually, or when major repairs are done, such as new hydraulic components, or put a new chain on, or a new auger. or even some of the like a hydraulic motor. Because you've got a worn hydraulic motor and it was calibrated with a worn hydraulic motor on. You put a new one on, it's going to be more effective. It's going to be stronger, so it's going to move that chain or auger faster, and it's not going to slow down, which means you put more salt out. Same thing with a chain. If a chain gets stretched over time, or some of the links start missing, some of the crossbars, the chain's going to be moving, but the product's not going to be coming out. So your salt spreading rate's going to be ineffective. Same thing, the auger. Some of the augers wear down. If you calibrate with a half worn auger, and mid-season the auger is completely worn out, and you change it, well, it's half worn out augers is going to put out less salt than a full auger with the full flutes on it. So you're going to be putting out more salt than what you're calibrated at. It's not really that hard to calibrate it. All we do is we take a big scale on the back of the truck here, and we dump the salt inside the back of a truck. We'll time it for a minute, and we come and weigh the scale. And then we enter the data into the onboard computer. We can do it with a bathroom scale, a fish scale, basically anything that weighs. That's somewhat calibrated. That's all you have to. That's all you have to do. It's really easy to do. Same thing with the brine. We'll measure how much brine comes out. We'll do it by gallons and enter the data in the computer. So if we're setting, 300 gallons per mile, that's what's coming out of there. Here's an example of some salt spreader controls. This is basically what the driver sees inside the dash, inside his truck. A bunch of different settings on there. And this is where we go and we enter the data that we gather when we're spreading, do the calibration. So the driver can his unload feature. He'll be able to do the spinner rates, the brine rates, salt rates, 200 pounds lane mile, 150 pounds lane mile, put it on standby. We also do calibration for salt and sand mix. We were talking about the traction sand. We just the same way we calibrate it because salt and straight salt and sand salt mix has a different weight to it, so it come out differently. So we got to make sure the drivers also are swapping over between salt and sand and regular sand or regular salt to make sure the product's coming out, so we know how much we are putting down. The air temp reading goes right on the dash here. That's what Tony was talking about earlier. The drivers, we know in certain temperatures in the roads, we'll adjust our salt spraying rates. We also capture how much salt is put out. We do report back to DNR on an annual basis how much salt we put out. So each event we can go back to the computers through our GPS or AVL system. It'll tell us what truck put out how much salt, how many pounds per lane mile is set at. We also go in real time and see exactly what that truck is putting out. So if we have a complaint that a vehicle, hey, this truck's put out more salt than needed, we go back and check and make sure the settings are correct on it. And the driver had it set correctly, and then we go back and check the calibration on it.
So we talk about the training end of it. So we do dry runs, right? We talked about new drivers. We'll get them out with those tablets so they can run their routes and they can actually see it. One of the unique things about snow plowing is it's hard to emulate that unless there's snow on the ground, right? So the city of De Pere has put some caster wheels on a truck on the top that will let the driver, a new driver, put it down. They can kind of get the feel of it. I will say, and these guys would too from experience, that driving during the day compared to driving at night with 6 inches of snow on the ground with all of the curbing covered is a lot different. So they review maps. They go through any of the hazards. Then we also do some wet runs, like when we talk about brine. We did that this year in Green Bay. We've created some residential brine routes for some hot spots that we call them in the city. And we went through just with water earlier this fall and ran some wet runs to see the time-wise, the calibration, hazards, any pooling, imperfections on the pavement, that type of thing. We also go through, they're looking at roundabouts, they're looking at cul-de-sacs, all these different things that are in these routes that it would seem easy to just drive it, but it's a lot harder in a plow truck. Additional training. So there, Wisconsin chapter of APWA does a snowplow rodeo every year. You may have seen it on the news. It used to be at Lambeau Field. Now it's at Fox Valley Tech or Fox Valley Stadium. So every year these drivers go through some of that stuff. It's a fun thing. This year in Green Bay, we had a second place, a fourth place, and a fifth place finisher. The guy that was in fourth place actually got to go to the National Snow Rodeo, which is in Colorado, and compete against the rest of the nation that plows snow. Tony, Nathan, and I have been through, we've had a 20-minute talk here. We've been through 3-day seminars on salting from UW to webinars like this, snow fighters associations, all kinds of things. But training makes all the difference for these drivers, right? If you can get the buy-in to why we salt, when we salt, how we do it, it makes a difference because they're the guys that are out on the road. They're the ones that are running the spreader controls. I think indirect salt usage. So I just wanted to touch on this. We're in the middle of our leaf collection right now in Green Bay. This is something that we put out to residents. The top is do this. If you keep it off the roadway, you keep the drains clear, you're going to have cleaner water. If we do the bottom, that can directly affect, right? If we have all these leaves in the street and we get an early snow, that's going to directly affect probably in January down the road how much salt we put on the road because these curb lines are going to be iced up. Or if you get a January thaw and then it refreezes, that's going to impact how much ice is on the road, which affects our salt usage. So there's other indirect effects. We're covering our salt and sand piles for the year, only using it or uncovering it when we need them. We have a new salt shed in Green Bay that keeps things covered. We put in some new pavement, impermeable surface, so it's not running into groundwater. All indirect effects that directly affect how much salt we end up using. The last slide that we have is public education. I'm going to let Tony touch on this, but that's the real reason. I guess my takeaway for this would be is to remember that salt is a tool that we have, but it's not a cure-all.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think a lot of our misconceptions of the general public that aren't in the profession is that, well, that's a slippery thing, just go salt it. And that's not necessarily the case. Every year, once or twice a year, I'll reach out to our police department after an extended storm and ask them to pull the accidents that they may have had during this storm. And then they send them over to me and I get an idea of, how did we do? And this particular one, a couple of years ago, we had, I think, 8 crashes. But as I look at the locations, 2 of them are in high school parking lot, stuff that we don't maintain. One of them's in a church parking lot we don't maintain. And then a couple of them are on county, like Interstate 41. That's county, even though it's in the city. So out of this, there's 1 or 2 streets that maybe one of the neighboring, 9th Street meets up with Ashland and Ashland's county maintained, but 9th is ours. I can get a feel of like, okay, during that storm event, we had 8 crashes. 1 or 2 of them were on a city maintained street. Doesn't mean it's weather related. Could have been someone not paying attention. But the big thing to put out that I would like to say is just, we can't drive in January like we do in July. And oftentimes, there's the quick reach out to say, on the social media about complaining about roads and what are the cities and municipalities doing. But ultimately, deep down, if we take a second and just change our driving behavior, the majority of vehicle crashes occur within the first 2 hours of a weather event because the weather road conditions may go from clear to bad in that short amount of time. And it takes that time for trucks to get out. And that's where the anti-icing will help us, is that we'll try and give us that little freedom to get our staff in and get back out. But if we can adjust our driving behavior for winter, a lot of it falls back on the driver themselves. And, one of the things that I often will tell our staff is that, no matter how bad the roads were, our staff all made it into plow. So if you do drive with due diligence and due regard, typically you can get to where you have to go. May not be convenient, but we all have to come in and plow for 10, 16 hours, whatever it may be, and then go home and shovel our driveways. We just ask that the residents just take a second and think about it's a big process, and we live in the Midwest, and if we change our behaviors as a driver, it'll help us in the long run.
Thank you. That was great, Nathan, Josh, and Tony. Very informative. It's always helpful to know that our city city of De Pere and Green Bay are behind us and looking out for the betterment of the community too. So, okay, so we will go to the questions we have. There was one. It was. So you're saying if you use less salt, then why does it seem like you pre-treat the streets even when there's rain events forecasted or warmer temps forecasted?
I think I can use a recent example. I mean, the snow that we just had in Door County was a county away. Bailey's Harbor, I think, got 7.8 inches. But from my standpoint, with my snow plan, I can't run the risk of having a unsafe community, right? So it's a forecast. Sometimes the forecast is wrong. Sometimes we've gotten into trouble with that when it's wrong. So we would rather, out of abundance of caution, to make sure that we're prepared. That 23.3% is better than 100% after the fact, because once it's on the road and it's bonded, the only way that we can get it off is with salt, with rock salt.
And one other thing to just add to that, in both of our communities, we do have bridges nearby factories that have smokestacks. We have a paper mill here on our bridge in Pere, the Leo Frigo Bridge, the I-43 bridge is next to a bunch of stacks. Those all are exposed underneath, so the pavement temperatures get cooler. That stacks that are the emissions that they're putting out do have moisture in them, and they can crystallize on those overpasses. So, maybe it's spot treated in various areas as well, but those are something to take into account. Environmental factors outside of Mother Nature that can cause bad conditions.
Oh, I see, Sue, you're trying to talk, but you're muted. If you're trying to read that next question in the chat, I'll just go ahead and take it if that's all right with folks. So somebody was saying, can you send out the slide indirect salt usage to send out to others? Appleton has leaves put in the street. Menasha has us put leaves on the apron. We need to educate Appleton. So part of my job is working with communities. So I work with over 40 of the communities. They all have permits with DNR, which aren't like a permit for building a garage. It's like you're urbanized enough, you have an impact. So you have to follow all these things. With the leaf collection side, all of our communities do leaf collection differently. They have different equipment, and that's why they have different leaf policies. New equipment is really expensive. So the difference in the policies for where you put leaves is probably based off of the leaf collection equipment that they have. So, for example, I believe Appleton does have a vacuum truck, so they come around and they vacuum up the leaves, but their hose is only so long and it can't reach far into that apron area. So while they understand the impacts that leaves can have, with what they have available to them for resources and equipment, that's why they have you put the leaves in that street so that they can actually get them up. I think a lot of times they'll also put caveats in with like leaves in particular, if that's their policy of like, don't put it out super, super early, like multiple days in advance. And reducing the time of your leaves sitting out on the road is also something that residents can do to assist with that if their policy is to put them on the street for collection.
Thank you, Alyssa. I knew I'd have some blooper somewhere, so thank you, all you presenters. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that Winter Salt Week for 2026 will be held in January, from January 26th to the 30th. So you can find more information at wintersaltweek.org. And then for just general information, you can check the website wisaltwise.com. And I'm hoping that people that view this pass the information along. It's so valuable and important, and I really appreciate the presenters today. And with that, I'll just say one more thing. Joshua, the number 4 justice.org is who hosted this. And so feel free to check our website and Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok page. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day. Really appreciate this.